So thank you, everyone, for coming to this panel on helping academic authors to demonstrate impact. And that is a huge topic and an important one. I'm looking forward to sharing ideas on how we might best approach the challenge. I'm Dinah Birch. I was formerly Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Cultural Engagement at the University of Liverpool, and I chaired main panel D, that's the panel for Arts and Humanities, in REF 2021. So joining me here, this panel, on my left here is Andrew Thompson, who is Professor of Global and Imperial History at Oxford and co-director of the Oxford Centre for Global History. And here is Georgina Endfield, who is Associate Pro-Vice-Chancellor for the Research Environment and Postgraduate Research, quite a job title, at the University of Liverpool. She was a panel member and interdisciplinary panel advisor for Geography and Environmental Studies in REF 2021 and is co-chair of the Unit of Assessment 7 within the REF People, Culture and Environment pilot exercise. And here is Karen Houghton. That may not be the way to pronounce it.
Okay, I accept all ways.
What's the right way, Karen?
Houghton.
Houghton. So Karen Houghton is Head of Impact in the Humanities Division at the University of Oxford, where her teams look after impact, engagement, and interdisciplinary research through the Oxford Centre for Research in the Humanities, commonly known as TORCH. Nothing to do with torture. I'll begin with just a few words about what we're going to be talking about in this panel. Of course, academics want to show the impact of their research beyond as well as within their academic contexts. Delivering impact is required by most funding bodies, and impact, of course, again, a section identified for assessment in REF 2029. And researchers do want their work to deliver public benefit. But how can authors build and evidence their impact, and how can academic publishers help in a rapidly changing research landscape? So we want to touch on topics including changing forms of publication, impact opportunities provided by different platforms for dissemination, open access, interdisciplinarity, events, AI, REF. There's a lot to consider, and some of these issues have already come up in different contexts in discussions earlier today. So each of our panelists in turn will point to some areas for discussion, and then there'll be time at the end of our session for questions and debate. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Andy.
Thanks, Dinah. We only have 5 or 6 minutes each, so I wondered what on earth I could say that was worthwhile in that time, and I'm just going to give you 3 moments in my career when I've been challenged to sort of demonstrate the wider reach and benefits of my research and try and tease out an implication or insight from each one of them. So I'm going to start off with my own work as a historian of empire, and part of that work has been on post-colonial migrations. And in that capacity, I found myself as the lead historical advisor to the Windrush Lessons Learned review, exploring the ways in which history can and sometimes should play a role in restorative justice. And the insight here, I think, is actually quite simple. It's just carry on what you've always been doing.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because my value to the Windrush Lessons Learned review was precisely the scholarly work I'd already published in book and article form. Work was on post-Second World War Britain and France and the experience of those from the colonies who were migrating to the metropoles. The REF, as you will know, actually requires impact case studies to be anchored in scholarly publication. But my argument would be that even if it didn't, it's the reputation that we have in the academy for not just relevant but rigorous academic research, and not just impactful but independent academic research, that actually gives us a value in the policy making process. So it's the strong relationships we have with you as publishers that count. The second example is quite different. I was once upon a time, for my sins, Chief Executive of UK Research Council. I was international champion for UK research and innovation, and almost overnight I was asked to set up a fund called the Global Challenges Research Fund. Some of you may have heard it. It was a £1.5 billion fund. It was multidisciplinary. We decided to anchor it in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and because it was ODA money, the terms and conditions of every grant was you have to demonstrate impact. Now, there's loads that I could reflect on here, but the thought I want to leave you with, or perhaps provocation, is that how would the Academy work with publishers, with you, to demonstrate impact arising from large programs of research rather than individual research projects? And what would that even have looked like for a Global Challenge Research Fund? We didn't do it. Would it have been an outlet designated, or outlets with publishers, a publication series, or more than one for that fund? Would it have been working with you or consortia of you to promote the fund through the websites and social media that you have and reach larger audiences? Would it have been something else? Would you have even had the appetite to engage in that way? Don't know. And then finally, and most recently, I currently sit as a member of a Global Commission on Modern Slavery. And next Tuesday, we're going to be in New York launching our first major report at the UN. I've contributed one of the 3 main chapters to that report, but there's also a parallel report written with one of my PhD students and postdocs. And I guess the insight from that, just to finish, is to what extent do we think the gathering momentum, because I think it is gathering, behind the impact agenda, if that's the phrase we want to use to describe it, is it going to push us? To what extent is that going to push us, or not, to more hybrid forms of publication? Now, put another way, we have the trade book as an established category of publication for bridging between scholarly audiences and what, for want of a better phrase, you might call broadsheet newspaper reading audiences. What would the equivalent of that look like for a humanities academic engaging with the world of international public policy? Is it even possible, sitting here today, to envisage that? Don't know. So, in summary, I think, how can you help us? Part of the answer is carrying on what you're already doing and do it in an exemplary way that you do. But another part of it might be that perhaps the future isn't simply going to be an extrapolation of the past here, and we are going to be challenged to think about differently about how cultures or evolving cultures of publication can be more impact-friendly and sensitive.
Thank you. Lots of questions arising from that, but we'll keep them in our heads and hand over to Georgina.
Thank you, Dinah. Hopefully everybody can hear me. One of the challenges of coming this late stage into the into the conference is that a lot of the issues have been covered already and really well. But so I'll try and synthesize some of my notes, and I timed this to be 6 minutes, but I'll probably try and edit it down as I go. But I just want to say a few things about some of the things that have been framed as seismic shifts in the previous session that we were in a few minutes ago. So in terms of the shifts towards electronic publishing, in terms of the shift towards open access, and AI just at the end as well. But I also want to talk a little bit about some fringe activities, if you will, which as an academic I've managed to benefit from in the world of publishing. But just a couple of thoughts from me, really. We all know the advent of online publishing has enabled a whole new world of scholarly communication operating on FAIR principles. And the opening out of traditional research content, enabling much wider dissemination of public-facing research, which is really important. But it's also created opportunities to complement the written word with dynamic images, metadata, as we heard in the previous session, video, data visualization, opportunities for semi-public peer review, which has also come up today. And all of this is coupled with the ability to remain current, to be able to update, to be able to maintain things that are visible for topical purposes, so you can update as you go. And social media is part of that revolution, I guess, and part of the new publishing fabric, principally through use of different platforms, as Dinah was saying, a promotion of new indicators on the basis of interactions with those platforms, things like ResearchGate, academia.edu, sites you like, and even YouTube and so on. And also platforms like LinkedIn, which is having its own revolution at the moment. Everybody keeps telling me you need to revamp your LinkedIn page, which I haven't got to yet, but I will. Now, ensuring research and impact of research, however, is very much a partnership. So we've been talking about publishing, but I think it's publishers and researchers, as Dinah said in the previous session, and also library partners as well, to collaborate to enhance discoverability, to enhance reach, and therefore potential impact. And this can include things like advice on titles, selecting relevant keywords, summaries, key bullet points, making things optimally searchable. And this can also involve things like tags, a whole new family of indicators, alt metrics and so on, which all can enhance visibility. And certainly that's something that I've been doing a little bit in terms of my own research. But as a new technology-enabled business model, it's open access. That's what everybody's talking about at the moment. And this is a genuine revolution, I think, albeit one that's been going on for about 15 years. A very heterogeneous landscape has emerged, different models, subscription models, pay-as-you-go. And I suppose one of the things that I want to think about in this particular, my provocation, if you will, is in terms of impact, what's the sustainability and what's the equity of those kinds of models, and can we think about that as something that we bring to the fore? Is everybody getting the same kind of level of opportunity, especially in an international context? Now, as we move towards mainstreaming of open access for long form, but we're also seeing some really exciting opportunities emerging. Trailblazers, I think, has already been mentioned. This is an initiative for rising early career researchers. It builds on the collaboration between University of Liverpool, my own university, Lancaster and Salford, and Liverpool University Press. With other universities coming on board as well. And this combines open access with a series of boot camps for the authors to take them through the publishing process and also think about reach and visibility as well. And it's hugely exciting, potentially a model for others to pursue. In terms of one of the other threads, and this is the sort of fringe benefits that I've called it fringe benefits. This is the kind of add-on, additional kinds of things that publishers can help with in terms of academic publishing for impact. Academic research by its nature is often niche, right? And it's often quite specialist and something that can really limit its reach and its appeal for a range of audiences. But there's different kinds of formats, different kinds of models, different kinds of approaches that we can think about to enhance the potential for impact. And I call these fringe activities here. And I'm not referring to things that are on the periphery, which you might think of when you think about fringe, but things that enhance the main act, if you will. So we can think about things like articles in the conversation, that's obviously one avenue, but other opportunities facilitated by publishers can serve similar kinds of purposes, whether that's policy briefs or summary stories, blog posts, podcasts, YouTube videos, and so on. I've got one anecdote, if I've got time, for that before I get to AI. And this relates to quite an obscure piece of research that I did on the Helm wind, which is England's only named wind, right? I don't know whether any of you know about it, but it's in Cumbria, on Crossfell. So England's only named wind, and me and my colleague Lucy Beale wrote an article about it some time ago now. But we also did an audio book and also an audio walk associated with it. And the audio walk was in conjunction with the Royal Geographical Society. And in what I like to think of as a retrospective stroke of genius, I asked John Ketley, the weatherman, to be the narrator for it. And his career was kind of on the wane and so on. So actually it served its purpose. We had more downloads of that audio walk and hence the paper, and more reads and more contact as a result of it. So there's all kinds of opportunity in terms of fringe benefits that can emerge as a result of doing something a little bit different. Finally, then, I just want to talk about AI. And I know a lot of people have been talking about AI today, but some thoughts from me in terms of impact and how AI might help in that kind of agenda. Fair to say there's some reservations. Authors and publishers warn about the AI threat to publishing, fearing that it might eventually overshadow human creativity, and we've seen a little bit of this today, and also decision-making. But I think the real potential of AI in terms of impact and reach, certainly, is its ability to enhance the capabilities of authors and publishers, not replace them. And, for example, through things like analysis of market trends, reader preferences, competitor performance, might help to identify the most effective keywords for search engine optimization. might improve authors' visibility on key platforms. It might also help to personalise a marketing campaign and strategies that resonate with particular audiences. And we might also look to AI-generated voices in audiobooks, for example, as well. So I'm already thinking about my next weather book and who might narrate that. Michael Fish, possibly, but anyway, ideas would be welcome. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Georgina. And now to Karen.
Brilliant. You can see I'm cribbing from my colleagues and taking notes from future reference, but I will credit them appropriately. Forgive me, I'm ill this week, so I'm a bit croaky, but I too will add my thoughts to how we might help academic authors to demonstrate impact. So from my own perspective, there are probably 3 key points. Quite unusually for someone whose job is to support the REF submission of my colleagues in the Humanities division, I would start by saying that impact isn't just for REF.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a yes. That's
Yes.
good. I was
Yeah.
waiting
Yes.
for the stunned silence.
No.
But yes, REF impact obviously gets the headlines because it's linked to institutional funding allocation, and it is really important. But really, we should be aiming for a culture of impactful research more broadly. And I'll say a little bit about that. I'm just going to say what we mean by impact. I know that often we assume that this is a straightforward concept, but it isn't always. Impact in higher education, for all that we kind of create some anxiety around it and contextualize and on and on, it really just refers to change. That's it. Impact means change in the world outside academia, and that's what we mean. And so as head of impact here in the Humanities division, I think I have the best job in the world. Others may disagree, but because I just help interesting people use their incredible, inspiring research to help make the world a better place. Usually, almost always. And I think it's important to say that not everyone undertakes impactful work naturally. Not all researchers are comfortable being kind of outward focused. Not everyone has to be, quite frankly. But many people are interested in making a difference. They just need a bit of help or upskilling. And I think that's where we all come in to this, to our own. When speaking to people about impact, I ask 2 questions, and colleagues will have heard me say these a million times. I'm sure they're completely sick of them, but they're the most straightforward, most basic questions, and I would encourage us all to develop some version of this. The first is, what do you want? When I'm talking to an academic colleague, I ask, what do you want your research to change outside of academia? Basic question. The second question is, how will you know when you've been successful in achieving those aims? I work in the humanities, but really the questions are the same in whatever the discipline. And what's important about this is that many people have never thought about what they want to change through their research outside of academia. They can place their academic contributions forensically, in forensic detail, but many people haven't actually thought about how their research could be used by end users. But most people I speak to do want to change something, whether that's school curricula or public understanding or professional practice or service provision. There are many different types of possible change. And that's important because higher education is changing too, as we've heard. Sadly, increasingly, we, all of us, need to demonstrate the value of academic research and to champion that true evidence-based expertise. And I'm sure we can all think of examples. Impact is a crucial way to do that. So we, me, you, my colleagues, we can all support researchers to be more outward-looking, to look for those opportunities to create change, to generate change through research, and to demonstrate impact, and not only for REF. I would add to that, though, it will take time, it will take a bit of support, it will take some effort by academics at all career stages to learn how to create that change. And I think by prompting our colleagues just to be able to think about those 2 basic questions, I think we can all contribute to that. I was asked a few weeks ago what one skill early career researchers could develop to help build impact, and I said they should perfect their elevator pitch. So I said 3 sentences or less. It could be 5, but short. 3 sentences or less on the subject of their research and why it matters. If colleagues can translate their research for non-specialists, be they communities or policymakers, the media industry, whoever that may be, then they're halfway there in terms of being able to create impact from their research. My second kind of key point is around the role of interdisciplinarity, which we've heard about already in supporting impactful work. There will always be a place for single discipline research, but increasingly, research will be challenge-led or mission-led or focusing on global challenges, focused on issues that concern us all, whether those are responsible use of AI, responding to the climate crisis, promoting global health and well-being, solving societal challenges such as democratic stability or instability, or modern slavery. As my colleague Christine Gerard, who's the director of Torch, not Torture, Torch, she wrote recently that solving global and societal challenges will require that interdisciplinary and cross-sectoral approaches. And those are inherently impactful because they're problem or challenge focused. Many of us in Oxford, because of the college system, we work in those interdisciplinary ways quite easily. Others don't. Not everyone here does, but that's something to consider because that is where we're being asked by the sector to go. And as evidence of that, I would share a quote with you from Stephen Hill, who's the Director of Research at Research England, who has made it clear that he sees the future of academia and academic research to be about collaboration. So cooperation as well as competition, which may be a model we're slightly more used to within the HE sector. And he says, over the next 15 years, research will become increasingly clustered around these societal challenges, not academic disciplines. It will depend on multidimensional teams integrating knowledges, that's a plural, from a broad range of publics and stakeholders. Collaboration will be the key metric by which universities judge themselves. Collaboration with all sorts of people and communities to deliver the research that they need. And increasingly, many of those programs of work will be large. So I think Andy's question is a good one to think about. When encouraging my academic colleagues to think and work in collaborative interdisciplinary ways, they often bump or say or feel they bump up against traditional disciplinary silos. For example, a perceived lack of high-quality interdisciplinary publishing outlets. And they tend toward, people feel that they have to publish in a single discipline journal or monograph. Yeah. This is changing, and for example, with OUP's intersections, but embracing true interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary work in publications will support the type of research that we need to meet our global challenges and will support impact as a result. So I would add that to your thinking about this. I think the question here for all of us is how we can collectively support academic to researchers to work more collaboratively and in more interdisciplinary ways. So my third point also goes to the point around involvement of research end users or stakeholders. Sometimes for REF we call them beneficiaries, but basically people who can use the research that our colleagues produce. To, as mentioned, to truly solve these key challenges of our time, researchers will need to consider end users in the research process and in research outputs. I love the idea of the semi-public peer reviews. I think that's a brilliant idea. This can involve anything from public consultation to involvement of experts by experience or lived experience panels, participatory research, co-design, co-production. With any of these, the pathways to impact and the pathways to change are built in from the beginning of the research. This is a good thing to do. We all are research end users, and so it is worth taking the time to help our colleagues think about how to develop this work. And to ask for it and to create an environment in which the publishing ecosystem recognizes that style of working. Because for many colleagues, this will involve new ways of working, and it will be a different way of developing research and research careers, but we can help. Publishers can encourage research that engages with stakeholders in the research process and support its dissemination into the hands of research users. So, crucially, I would say, you can ask for supplementary documents that support impactful engagement alongside the core publications. For example, plain English summaries, as well as abstracts, briefing notes for policymakers or SMEs, short syntheses of key issues for policymakers, and I would add those to the things that Georgina has already mentioned. It seems to me that there is a fair degree of self-interest in taking this approach, both for people working in higher education and for publishers. More and more colleagues, as has already been mentioned, tell me that they're interested in publishing in trade or crossover books rather than traditional academic outputs because they feel they want their work to be more widely read and that they want their work to make a difference, whether that's changing public opinion or engaging in a particular issue. Many of our academic colleagues do want to make a difference. They want to have impact, whatever that looks like for them. And they see publishing their research as one avenue for doing that. So I would close with a question. How might each of us in our respective roles and in our respective organizations support our academic authors to build the skills and to build the pathways that support impact and impactful engagement with their research?
Thank you, Karen. I'm just going to add 3 very brief points of my own before we open the floor for questions. The first is a ref point. I'd like to underline your point about impact going far beyond ref. But having said that, I do think that ref has helped authors and publishers to think about the multiplicity of types of impact. It's a very large term. And I feel that certainly academics and probably publishers too are still a little narrow in the way in which they conceive of impact. We on the REF team compiled a huge list, a dizzying list really, of different kinds of impact, including the kind of policy impact you were talking about, Andy, the kind of impact that you were talking about in dissemination, the weather podcast, that's all part of the picture. But it can also include really impact on quite a small but intense scale where you make a big difference to the lives of 20 people within a community group, say of asylum seekers or people with long-term mental health issues. Just from the REF point of view, those case studies can in fact score, and did score very highly, but beyond REF too, those are things that really matter. And I think publishers can help researchers, to think outside some of the more conventional boxes when we're conceiving of impact. The second point that I would make is one word really, serendipity. You plan your research, you publish your research, and you think about pathways to impact. You need to think about pathways to impact. What kind of public benefit will be delivered by this research? But you can't always see what that will be. I don't suppose for a moment, Andy, in doing the research that's led to this report on modern slavery, wrote his book thinking, oh, this will be good because I'll be able to make a difference to modern slavery. That came down the line and was unpredicted. And sometimes publishers, I think, can really step in there to help authors extend the benefit of their research in ways that authors themselves might not readily conceive of. And the final point I just want to touch on goes back to your point, Georgina, about platforms for research. You mentioned, for instance, very briefly, the conversation. I don't know how many in this room, actually out of curiosity I will ask, how many of you know about the conversation or perhaps look at pieces on the conversation? This is very gratifying. It's a project that has had Research Council support, as you will know. But this is a platform that delivers public benefit of a certain kind. It has a huge international readership. It has a much younger demographic than is usually the case for, say, broadsheet readership. And it provides a range of training programs for academics to give themselves an opportunity to develop communication skills on a different level. And it interlocks with more conventional, if you like, learned society or academic presses and their means of looking at impact and disseminating it. It's a complex landscape with many moving parts and interlocking issues. And it's a big challenge, but I think also an opportunity for us to take that forward. So, Questions? Yes.
Thanks. Is that okay? Yeah. Thanks. I'm Val from OUP, and yeah, thanks for sharing really interesting insights. The first thing that kind of stood out to me is that none of you talked about impact factor and citations, which I half expected to be the focus of this session. And yeah, so I am a data analyst, and I work with OUP sales staff. And so I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about that link between, the academic as an author, but also as a consumer of that research, relating to the libraries that you work with and kind of work for at the same time. That sort of like weird binary that we have, that where you're both a producer of content and a consumer of content, and where the impact matters more. Whether it's for you as a content creator, as a researcher, or maybe whether it's for you as a consumer of that research, as a way for you to curate what it is that matters to you when you choose to read a paper or buy a book.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a good question. I didn't mention metrics, and I didn't mention citations, possibly because I come from a background where we don't necessarily take those into account when we're talking about impact. So when I was on the ref panel, I was on in main panel C. In geography, it falls into main panel C, and we weren't allowed to use metrics. It was not, and the same was true for main panel D across all of those subpanels. It was about assessing the impact of work in and of itself, and reading outputs, and checking for significance, rigor, originality, and doing it that way. And so I'm probably a bit biased in that sense, but absolutely there's potential for academic impact, for consumption, as you were saying, in terms of readership of particular outputs, whatever form they take, and that's absolutely legitimate. I think, as I say, I was coming from the perspective of, does it matter how many reads you've had if it's the same person that's downloading it every single time, It's something to think about in terms of what it actually tells you. You need to nuance and contextualize those kinds of metrics, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose maybe it's sort of quite a surprising thing to say for a former head of a research council, but I have a problem with the word impact. And actually, we've got very close when I was at UKRI to completely rewriting the JES form, very close, and I wish we had. And on the basis that, it's a crime against something, if not a humanity as it stands at the moment. But there are only 4 or 5 relevant questions to ask when you're going to give someone some money to do research. And I think the first question is, why do you think that research is interesting and important? And it could be interesting and important to the academy, beyond the academy, or both. But that really is the taproot of everything. Now, I actually think that, and this wasn't the way that the ref panels went last time, but it's perfectly reasonable in answering that question to turn to impact factors, as it's reasonable to turn to views of the sort of, quality of the sort of journals. What isn't reasonable is to use any of those things as a proxy in and of itself for why it's interesting and important. So, you make a case, and you make a case by paying attention to those things or other things or whatever. But the ultimate question is, why do we think this work is interesting and important within the academy, potentially beyond the academy? And the moment you buy into a language of impact, I think you end up in, not inevitably, but often in fairly reductive ways, and limited ways of thinking about research. So, I think in some ways this humanities scholars would of course do this, because we're all over critiquing language all the time. But, I do actually think that there is something to be said here for just pausing and reflecting on the language that we use to appraise the thing that we're interested in appraising, and I'm all for impact in the sense that, my own college in 1937, before this was remotely fashionable in academia, had built into its charter, Lord Nuffield, I'm giving you money to promote cooperation between the academic and non-academic worlds. How brilliant is it to have that in your charter? But you don't need impact measures as the only way of fulfilling that mission. So I'm absolutely up for taking research, and I've built a lot of my career around that. But as the same way, I'd be absolutely up for a scholar who just says, well, look, best will in the world, probably what I'm doing isn't that relevant or resonant outside the academy. But inside the academy, it's really quite important. And as Dinah says, maybe in 20 or 30 years' time, actually, it will have applications that I could have never foreseen in my career.
Yeah, impact is a long game. It often extends far beyond the ref cycle, which is another problem with ref. But I have to say, I do share some of Andy's misgivings about the word. We do brood on words. It's always had a rather percussive kind of sound to me. Bang.
Instant.
Yeah, quite. And that's not really what impact is. I prefer your term, change, but also public benefit. Because, as many have pointed out, it's perfectly possible for research to have impact of a negative kind, and that often happens, as we know. Of course, you wouldn't necessarily submit a case study on that, but it's perhaps not. It's a rather limited term for what we're talking about here this afternoon. Do you want to add anything there, Karen?
No, I would just echo that. I think absolutely we talk about it. Yeah, I think I would just echo all of that. Full stop.
Right, question. Go ahead.
Thank you. Mandy Hill from Cambridge University Press. Want to actually build on what you were just saying, and Andrew in particular. One of the concerns that sometimes we hear around measuring impact in any way is that it can bias against sort of the more pure forms of research, for whom, as you've just said, the impact or change might take decades. So that sort of that research that's going to be fundamental and foundational for what might come in the future might become less fashionable, and might be deprioritised. And I wonder if there's anything you think we collectively could be doing to try to avoid that, so that there isn't a shift away from that more sort of fundamental, pure research.
I would say the first thing that comes to mind is not everyone has to do impact. And I think it's about getting that mix and about thinking about the possibility of public benefit over time, and I do like that term. So not everybody has to do it. Not everybody has to have their, some work, as we've just said, may develop public benefit in ways that we haven't foreseen or over longer periods of time. So I think when people think about measuring impact, I get a lot of people saying to me, I want to measure impact, I want to evidence impact. I think we need to kind of then say, well, what are you actually trying to do? And what kind of measurement or evidencing is appropriate to the kind of focus of that particular piece of research? It won't, impact doesn't grow at the same rate for everyone or on the same timescales, and not everyone has to do it. And not everyone is kind of suited to it or wants to do it either.
And if I can, I think the timescales point is really important, and slightly iconoclastic comment, but I suspect that what REF will do is reward mid-range impact, even in the case studies, because the really seismic changes in research will not primarily get captured by the REF. They don't come across as frequently, and they often come across on very long timescales. I can remember once interviewing a biochemist, he remained nameless, but one of the world's leading biochemists, to sit on the governing body of my research council. And this was the Arts and Humanities Research Council, but I wanted a scientist on it. And you couldn't accuse him of preparing particularly well for this interview, but I still wanted him on it. And the civil servant got very annoyed with him, and because he wasn't that knowledgeable about us. When we had him on the council, he was worth his weight in gold. But she said to him, slight moment of frustration, okay, what do you know about impact? And he just gave this exquisite 5-minute lecture on 100 years of scientific discovery, impactful discovery, and how none of them had ever been anticipated. So I think we have to have the agility, and I don't say that sort of, low level, medium level, very high level impact, that any are more or less than others. They're different things, yeah? But some of the things that's driving government agendas here, yeah, come on long time scales. And the other thing that I would say is that we tend to assume, we think about impact in a very linear way. And I think that disadvantages the academy and causes problems for publishers. So we've got responsible academics and publishers for getting this work and taking it out of the academy into these other worlds and making it comprehensible. It doesn't allow for the possibility that those people in those other worlds are actually quite interested in coming back into the academy to talk to us about what we're doing in a more basic and fundamental research sense. It precludes that possibility, but I know in my own work, my work on the Global Commission on Modern Slavery comes out of 5 years of work of thinking about the past, present and future of international organisations. And I know people in those organisations are interested in coming here and talking to us with what we do. And I just wish, again, we had a language that allowed us to think of this as a flow that goes in both directions.
REF is an imperfect instrument. I don't think anyone would claim that it does everything that might be wished. But I will say that I do remember very clearly a time when the delivery of any kind of public benefit in a planned way, if you like, as part of a research project, really carried no weight within academia, and indeed was rather scorned as a slightly infra-dig kind of interest that no serious thinker or researcher would ever involve him or more rarely herself in. So I do think that though there are hazards, the one you've identified is certainly one of them, what's sometimes called blue sky research, and the risk that will be marginalised, that is among the hazards. But I think on balance, it has been a positive change within academia, that what we can do to enhance the public benefit is worth doing. But when you talk, as I have done many times in my career, to a particle physicist who is working on the identification of something that no one but he, and sometimes I wonder about he, can really understand, what will be the impact of that strange thing? Oh, it's a difficult thing. Yes, so not everything will fall within the category. Yes, question.
Thanks, Dinah. Anthony Conn, Liverpool University Press. It's been a really rich panel. Thank you all very much. Georgina mentioned equity, and a bit of feedback. I'm interested in early career researchers in this space. So the activity to generate impact being yet another thing whilst you're trying to create a career, it being a disadvantage. Also that sometimes necessary conservatism, actually, in early career researchers who have been told, this is the gold standard, the hierarchies of prestige are there. And there is a sense, I think, that many publishers have got the tools to do media rich or provide other forms of support for novel forms of publication, but there isn't so much of an appetite there. Are you seeing any shift? I'm conscious we've got some very distinguished scholars on this panel. Are you seeing the shift in early career researchers? Are they more open to trying the new, as it were?
Yeah.
I would say yes, definitely. You see much more appetite for engaging in novel forms of publishing, in different kinds of ways of thinking, taking every opportunity they possibly can, seeking out those opportunities. Often the best, going back to REF terminology, the best 4-star work comes from our early career researchers, and there's often an assumption that that's not the case, and they need mentoring and they need supporting. And they absolutely do, but they're often the people who have the appetite for change in a really positive way. What they haven't got is access to the funds and the networks and so on.
Yeah.
And that's where things like the initiatives that I know you've set up, where there's potential pay-in from established scholars in terms of waiving royalties and so on to pay into early career researcher funds to enable them to publish and is it in open access forms. I think that is a really positive change, and there's other initiatives like that we can roll out, I think.
I mean, it's an interesting question because I think it's both, Anthony, and it's a well-posed question. I think, as Dinah says, and she was absolutely right to say what you did just say, that it has been enabling the impact agenda, but it's also been oppressive at the same time. And we just don't live at we live in an age of sort of, dare I say it, Isaiah Berlin, terrible simplifiers of the human experience, and holding two truths in our heads at once seems to be quite difficult at the moment. But it's both of those things. But I do think, we all know the oppression thing, early career researchers thinking that they've got to have the impact case study for the ref. They've got to have a strong impact narrative to get the grant. But I would say at my time at the Arts and Humanities Research Council, where Georgina and I worked closely together, people vote with their feet around grants. And we had schemes with the BBC, some of you will know, were New Generation Thinkers, with Institute for Government for Public Policy Research, with placements into cultural organisations and the collaborative PhDs with galleries, libraries, museums, early career researchers flocked to those schemes because they valued them, and it did provide some of that training, and some of the skills to then go on and think about how you applied for a grant and built an impact narrative around it. What used to worry me as Chief Exec of AHRC was that, were we getting into territory where an impact tail was, wagging the research dog? Yeah. And I think, we should have had the confidence, but this is actually not just AHRC, it's panels of peer reviewers, to give out a grant if it was interesting, important work, without there being any impact necessarily, in the same way that we would have given out a grant because of that wonderful impact that might have emerged out of it. So I think it's both, and maybe our responsibility is to, tip that balance and make sure that it feels more enabling than it does sort of oppressive.
Thank you. And we have run out of time. I don't quite know how that's happened, but so it is. So thank you all for being a very lively and interesting audience. We do now have a 30-minute break before we move to the final keynote of the day. Where does publishing fit in to the research cycle? But before we disperse, I'm sure you'll all want to join me in thanking our three panellists for stimulating such a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.